Hey guys, welcome back to the second part of my Dissolve into Crows VFX tutorial. Now, if you have no idea what this is about, a while back I created this effect of Celina from Fables and Fashion dissolving into a murder of crows. In the last part of this tutorial, which you can check out right here, I've showed you how to set up your 3ds Max scene, the geometry, the lighting, the cameras. I then showed you how to use a birth texture and P-flow to set up your particle system and animate it nicely so it looks like a murder of crows shooting out of a person. In this part of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to composite your rendered crows and their shadows back onto your original footage inside of Adobe After Effects. Now, just like the last part, this is going to be a fairly advanced tutorial, so you should really know your way around After Effects. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. What I have here is the original clip where Celina was standing on the end of the pier. Now, you may notice that Celina is not in it. That is because in order to make her dissolve into a bunch of crows, we need some footage without her in the frame. Note that I've cleaned out a few background elements, such as some of the industry buildings and the boats that could be seen in the distance, just to make the scene look a little bit more desolate. Let's get started dissolving Celina. Remember how I told you to be accurate when we rotoscoped her out in the last part of this tutorial because we were going to use that same clip again? Well, here it is. The rotoscope layer of Celina spinning around, overlaid on top of my clean plate. Note that the clip does end once the spin is completed because by that time Celina will be entirely dissolved anyways. Let's hide this layer for now and have a look at the crows we rendered out in the last part of this tutorial. I have already placed this layer on top of my footage. You have to be careful to use the same frame rate and timing as your original footage so the crows sync up exactly with the animation. If you're not sure how to do this, check out part 5 of my 3D integration visual effects tutorial series. Looks quite cool, but it also looks like all of the crows joined the blue men group. To fix any color issues, you can simply use a hue and saturation or a curves effect. Just so we can see what we're doing when color correcting the crows to better fit into our scene, let's unhide the rotoscope layer of Celina. Next, search for the hue and saturation effect and apply it to the crows layer. There's many ways to do this. What's important is to make sure your rendered elements match onto your footage in terms of timing, color and lighting. Go to the hue and saturation effect and bring down the saturation and the lightness until your crows are nice and dark. Scrub through your footage and your crows should now fit nicely into your shot. You may notice that I have a lot of small masks on my crows layer. Because I did not model the size of the pier in 3D Studio Max, I have to make sure the crows don't appear to be penetrating the solid wood. As you can see, I have added a number of subtractive masks where I could see the crows passing through the solid sides of the pier. For this kind of effect, it might not even be terribly noticeable due to the hectic nature of the scene, but you can hugely improve the quality of your visual effects by looking out for these little details. Let's start dissolving Celina by using a matte layer. For this, duplicate your crows layer and hide this copy for now. We're going to use the lower crows layer as a matte to the rotoscope layer with Celina in it to make her disintegrate. You can achieve this by simply setting the track matte option on the Celina layer to alpha inverted. Play back the clip and you should see Celina crumbling apart. In fact, we are just cutting out the shapes of the emergent crows from her layer by using a matte. This works pretty well, but notice that Celina never fully vanishes. This happens because the crows never fully obscure her. To solve this, I added a large animated mask that moves from bottom to top, following the disintegration effect to hide Celina entirely. I've had this mask disabled just to show you how to set this up, so let's set it back to subtract mode. Note that my mask is keyframed to match up with Celina's spin and follows behind the disintegration effect caused by the crow's matte layer. Scrub through your footage and you should now see Celina or whoever you filmed crumble apart and then vanish. Now watch this. Enable the copy we made of the crow's layer and preview your composition. Now that is pretty cool. However, currently the two layers of the visible crows and the matte layer are perfectly in sync, which means we do not see the crumbling effect very much because it is hidden behind the crows. Actually, while we're at it, let's also rename the matte layer to crows matte. Keeping a project well organized and your layers properly named is a good habit to get into, and it will help you greatly when dealing with more complex effects. Now, to better show the disintegration effect, I am going to offset my crow's matte layer just a little bit. I'm going to make it lag one frame behind the crow's layer so we can see Celina fraying out. It's a subtle change, but it makes the effect look a whole lot more interesting. Let's add a big area shadow to our murder of crows to make it seem more dense and threatening. For this, simply create a new black solid. Select the pen tool and lower the opacity of the black solid so you can see what you're doing. Then draw a rough mask around the pier area. Open up the mask settings and increase the feathering by quite a bit to blur the shadow area out. Next, animate the opacity of the black solid from fully transparent to around 40% when most of the crows have been spawned. Actually, I will resize the mask a little bit so that some of the shadow falls onto the ocean just beyond the pier. Move forward and create a few more keyframes to slowly fade out the black shadow as the crows dissipate. Playing this effect back, I'd say it looks pretty darn cool. Now, I have touched on this before in my 3D integration visual effects series, but remember how I always advocate to render out a ZDepth pass for your 3D elements? The ZDepth pass can help you composite stock footage layers with your 3D elements in a more organic way. This method is called ZDepth compositing. Let me quickly show you how to do that. Let's assume we want to add a black burst of smoke to Celina as she dissolves. Now, this is just an example. This technique applies to integrating any rendered 3D elements with 2D layers. I have the smoke charge here from the Action Essentials 2 pack. Make sure to check the description of this video for links to some free stock footage elements if you don't have any. Drag this layer into your composition on top of your crows layer. Since I want the smoke element to be black, I will add a simple tint effect to it and set the map white to property to black to create a thick dark smoke. Next, line the smoke up with your dissolve into crows effect and scale the layer up to match nicely over your footage. I know I'm doing a rough job here, but this is just so I can show you how to properly use your ZDepth layer. I will also draw a rough mask around the bottom of the stock footage element to remove the harsh bottom edge. Set the mask mode to subtract, feather it out and increase the mask expansion if required. The smoke charge or whatever other stock footage you used should now sit on top of your crows effect. Let me just scale it up a little bit more so it doesn't get cut off at the top. There. Note that this stock footage element overlays our crows in a very unnatural way, and one way to blend the two together nicely is by using the ZDepth pass we rendered out. For this, grab your ZDepth pass and drop it into your composition on top of your stock footage layer. Now, for this to work properly, you want to make sure that your project is set to work in full 32-bit. You can alt-click on this button right here to change it from 8 to 16 to 32-bit. We will use this ZDepth pass layer as a mat for the stock footage element, but first we need to line it up to be in sync with our rendered crows. By now, you should know that the ZDepth pass is a grayscale image that represents the depth of your 3D scene. White implies closer to the camera and black is further away. By using this layer as a luma or luma inverted mat, we can control the opacity of the stock footage smoke layer below it based on the 3D position of the crows in our scene. What's cool about this is that we can alter this ZDepth layer by using an exposure effect and therefore define at what depth our stock footage layer sits in between the crows. To see what I mean, let's apply an exposure effect to the ZDepth layer. Bring down the offset as far as you can so your image goes entirely black. Next, bring up your exposure value to reveal the crows again. Note that we can control the visibility of the crows in relation to the distance from the camera. Set the exposure so that the furthest crows you can see are about at the distance of where Celina is standing on the pier. Finally, bring up the gamma correction to increase the contrast and make the outline of the crows a little bit harsher. That's pretty good. The last thing we have to do is set the track matte for the smoke charged stock footage layer we added to luma inverted. And voila! The black smoke sits nicely in between the crows. Now, it might seem to you like we could have just dropped the smoke layer below the crows, but that would not have given us the same effect. Right now, the smoke obscures any crows that are further away from the camera than where Celina is standing. If we drop the smoke below the crows layer, any crow, no matter how far away, would sit on top of the smoke layer. Also, and this is very cool, we can alter the depth at which the stock footage layer sits in our scene by changing the exposure property on the exposure effect. For example, we can move it further away until it sits even behind the pier, or we can move it closer to the camera. You can tweak this to your liking. And that is why you always want to render out a ZDepth pass for your 3D elements. Anyways, I just wanted to demonstrate this technique as it's a great technique for compositing 2D layers with your 3D elements in a natural way. Let's delete the ZDepth and the smoke layer again. Now, before I finish, I want to add one more detail to the dissolve into crows effect. Rather than having Celina dissolve instantaneously into the crows, I want a dark shadow to move over her body just ahead of the disintegration line to indicate the impending change. For this, duplicate the rotoscope layer of Celina as well as the crows layer. Move these two layers just below each other, select them and then pre-compose them. I will call this new composition Dark Shadow and then hit OK. Jump into this composition and you should see Celina disappearing with the crows being spawned on top of her. Note that the Celina layer is set to use an alpha inverted matte, but because our matte layer, the crows, is still set to visible, we can't see anything happening. So let's first disable the visibility of the crows layer. Better, that looks like it did in our original composition. Now however, let's change the track matte on the Celina layer to alpha matte. What we get now is a small section of Celina being revealed only where the crows are overlapping her as she spins around. This pattern will be the dark shadow that precedes the actual disintegration effect. Currently the crows matte we have here is perfectly in sync with the crows layer in our parent composition. What we want to do is offset the crows matte just a little bit to the left so the pattern of the crows is a few frames ahead. Go back to the parent composition, select the dark shadow layer and apply a hue and saturation effect to it. Bring down the saturation and the lightness considerably to make this overlay layer nice and dark. Scrubbing through the composition, we can now see a dark shadow precede the actual line of disintegration as it sweeps up Celina's body. Now, I think there's actually a little bit too much shadow crossing her body, but that's easy to fix. Simply jump back into your dark shadow composition and tweak the timing of the crow's matte layer. We want this layer to be ahead of the original crow's layer by just a little bit. Again, you can tweak this however you like. Let's have a look at what this looks like in our final effect. Much better. Notice that the dark shadow layer is fairly subtle and only really one frame ahead of the murder of crows shooting out of Celina, but it does make the effect look a lot more interesting and detailed. Return to the beginning of your composition and play back your final dissolving the crows effect. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I hope it finally answered all of the questions that I've been getting on how to create this particular 3D integration effect. Now, if you still have any comments, questions or suggestions, just leave them in the section below. If you'd like to show some support, please subscribe, hit that like button, share it around, and if you're hungry for more, you can also find and follow me on Facebook or Twitter. Until next time, I will see you later.